There was no full moon over Jerusalem that night. Even the stars seemed to have pulled back. The faint glow of torches beyond the city walls cast a thin orange line across the darkness of the Kidron Valley. The ancient olive trees of the Garden of Gethsemane had stood in that valley for centuries. Trees that had witnessed the building of Solomon's temple. Trees that had seen wars, births, deaths. But they had never seen a night like this. Jesus had withdrawn to the farthest corner of the garden. He had fallen face down on the ground, a posture that, in Jewish tradition, was reserved for only the deepest agony, the heaviest burden. Even the greatest religious leaders of the time never let themselves be seen like this. They protected their dignity. But he was here, face pressed to the earth. And what came from his lips, Abba? Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, Abba. In Aramaic, that word meant father, but not the formal religious kind. It was the word a small child used: intimate, warm, personal. In all of Jewish history, no one had ever addressed God with such raw closeness. And in that moment, the strange, almost medical, detail that Luke recorded actually happened. His sweat fell like drops of blood. There was no full moon over Jerusalem that night. Even the stars seemed to have pulled back. The faint glow of torches beyond the city walls cast a thin orange line across the darkness of the Kidron Valley. The ancient olive trees of the Garden of Gethsemane had stood in that valley for centuries. Trees that had witnessed the building of Solomon's temple. Trees that had seen wars, births, deaths. But they had never seen a night like this. Jesus had withdrawn to the farthest corner of the garden. He had fallen face down on the ground, a posture that, in Jewish tradition, was reserved for only the deepest agony, the heaviest burden. Even the greatest religious leaders of the time never let themselves be seen like this. They protected their dignity. But he was here, face pressed to the earth. And what came from his lips, Abba? Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, Abba. In Aramaic, that word meant father, but not the formal religious kind. It was the word a small child used: intimate, warm, personal. In all of Jewish history, no one had ever addressed God with such raw closeness. And in that moment, the strange, almost medical, detail that Luke recorded actually happened. His sweat fell like drops of blood. There was no full moon over Jerusalem that night. Even the stars seemed to have pulled back. The faint glow of torches beyond the city walls cast a thin orange line across the darkness of the Kidron Valley. The ancient olive trees of the Garden of Gethsemane had stood in that valley for centuries. Trees that had witnessed the building of Solomon's temple. Trees that had seen wars, births, deaths. But they had never seen a night like this. Jesus had withdrawn to the farthest corner of the garden. He had fallen face down on the ground, a posture that, in Jewish tradition, was reserved for only the deepest agony, the heaviest burden. Even the greatest religious leaders of the time never let themselves be seen like this. They protected their dignity. But he was here, face pressed to the earth. And what came from his lips, Abba? Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, Abba. In Aramaic, that word meant father, but not the formal religious kind. It was the word a small child used: intimate, warm, personal. In all of Jewish history, no one had ever addressed God with such raw closeness. And in that moment, the strange, almost medical, detail that Luke recorded actually happened. His sweat fell like drops of blood. Night had deepened. It was well past midnight, and at the entrance to the garden, a light appeared. Then 5, then 10, then more than 50 torches, temple guards, Roman soldiers. In the crowd there were swords and clubs, as if they had come to arrest an army. And walking in front of them all, acting as their guide, was Judas. They had arranged a signal beforehand. Simple, ruthless. The one I kiss, that's him. Arrest him. When Judas saw Jesus, he walked straight toward him. He didn't want to hesitate, because if he hesitated, he might turn back. So he smiled, or tried to, and kissed him on the cheek. And what did Jesus say? He didn't shout. He didn't run. He didn't turn to the crowd in fury. He looked at Judas and asked, "Friend, what are you here for?" In some translations, that word friend gets softened or flattened. But in the original Greek, the word is heteros. It means companion, comrade, someone close to you. Jesus called him friend, while the betrayal was literally happening. Think about that for a moment. If the person who had spent 3 years with you, who had shared every meal with you, who had seen every miracle and every quiet moment, if that person sold you for 30 pieces of silver and showed up to hand you over with a kiss, what would you call them? Right at that moment, chaos erupted Peter. Impulsive, hot-blooded, a man of action before all else. Didn't wait. He drew his sword and lunged. His aim was off, or the man ducked, nobody knows for sure. But he caught the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant, clean off blood. Malchus hit the ground. The soldiers froze and Jesus knelt down. The man about to be arrested, the man about to be put on trial, the man who would be nailed to a cross by morning. He knelt down, picked up the ear of his enemy's servant, and placed it back, and it healed. Then he turned to Peter. "Put your sword away. All who draw the sword will die by the sword." And then he turned to face the crowd, Roman soldiers, temple guards, torches, weapons, and asked them a question nobody had expected. "Am I leading a rebellion that you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" In the dark, in the middle of his own arrest. That question hung in the air. Nobody answered. Then something happened that Mark recorded. Something most people skip right over. Every single disciple ran. But Mark adds one detail that exists only in his gospel, nowhere else. And because of this, many scholars believe the person Mark is describing is Mark himself. There was a young man wearing nothing but a linen cloth around his body. Someone grabbed him. He left the cloth behind and ran away naked. Why does this matter? Because this makes the whole scene real. This is not theology. This is not mythology. This is the memory of a man who was so terrified he fled naked into the streets of Jerusalem. Nobody invents this kind of embarrassment, and Jesus stood in the middle of it all alone. His friends had scattered, his disciples were gone, surrounded by torches and chains and soldiers in the dark of a garden. He was completely alone, and he let them go. They took him first to Annas. Annas was one of the most powerful religious figures of the era. He wasn't officially the high priest anymore. That position had passed to his son-in-law Caiaphas. But behind the scenes, in the shadows, the real power still ran through him. 5 of his sons and his son-in-law had all held the high priesthood. He controlled the religious economy of Jerusalem, the money changers in the temple courts. His people Annas began to question him about his teachings, his disciples. And here, right here, Jesus did something unexpected. He didn't yield. He didn't go quiet, but he also didn't raise his voice. He said, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple. I never said anything in secret. So why are you questioning me? Ask the ones who heard me. They know what I said." This was actually a precise legal challenge. Under both Roman law and Jewish legal tradition, what he said was essentially, "You can't interrogate me without witnesses. Bring the evidence." He was right, but law wasn't operating in that room. A guard stepped forward and hit him across the face, open-handed. "Is that how you answer the high priest?" And Jesus' response was the opposite of what everyone in that room expected. "If I said something wrong, prove it. But if I told the truth, why did you hit me?" Calm, clear, logical, not fear, not rage. The clarity of a man who has reached the end of something and is done pretending otherwise. While all of this was happening inside, out in the courtyard on a cold spring night, a fire was burning. Guards and servants had gathered around it for warmth, and among them, collar pulled up, trying not to be recognized, was someone who had no business being there. Peter. He had run, yes, but he hadn't gone far. He had followed the crowd from a distance, and now he was inside the enemy's courtyard, warming himself by their fire, which was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, and probably both. A servant girl looked at him. "You were with him. "You're one of his disciples." Peter denied it a little while later. "Someone else." "You're one of them." Denied again, and an hour later, a third. "You definitely were with him. Your accent gives you away. You're from Galilee." And Peter swore. He cursed. He said, "I don't know this man." At that exact moment, a rooster crowed. And here is the moment that Luke captures, the moment that stops you cold. Jesus was being led through the courtyard right then. He turned and looked at Peter. One look across the fire-lit courtyard, not a word spoken, and Peter walked outside and wept bitterly. He had been held through the entire night, questioned, humiliated. When morning came, they took him to Pontius Pilate because the Jewish religious court didn't have the authority to carry out an execution. Rome had to sign off. Pilate was uncomfortable. Not just politically, personally. His wife had sent him a message that morning. "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man. I suffered greatly in a dream last night because of him." In the ancient world, dreams were not dismissed. The fact that Pilate's wife sent this message tells us that even within the governor's household, something about this situation felt deeply wrong. Pilate questioned Jesus. What followed was one of the strangest interrogation dialogues in all of recorded history. "Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own question? Or did others put you up to this?" Pilate was thrown. The defendant was questioning the questioner. "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own people handed you over. What is it you've done? My kingdom is not of this world." Pilate went back out to the crowd and said, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But the crowd didn't want that. They screamed for blood. Pilate went back and forth, in and out between the crowd and Jesus. And something broke inside him. He called for a basin of water, and in front of the crowd, he washed his hands. "I am innocent of this man's blood." Throughout all of history, people have washed their hands of things they did, but few gestures have ever been as hollow as that one. When they placed the cross on his back, the sun was already rising. How many hours had passed since Gethsemane? 6? 7? In that time, he had been interrogated, tried, mocked, beaten, and crowned with thorns. He hadn't slept. And now, on the stone-paved road of the Via Dolorosa, the streets of Jerusalem were beneath his feet. Women were weeping at the roadside. Crowds watched. Some shouted. Some stood in silence. And he stopped. He turned. He turned to the weeping women and said, "And this is almost unbelievable." He said to them, "Don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." A man walking toward his own death, comforting the people who were crying for him. The people who wrote this story weren't clever enough to make it up. Either someone who was there told it, or it actually happened.